Welcome back to Briggs on Books, our international talk show where we talk to authors from all over the world. Not just authors, but editors, proofreaders, anybody that can help you get your book published. Today we have a very fascinating author who's traveled the world, and I had a great biography of her I was going to read, but we'll just make her tell us her biography. Welcome, Terry Repak. Your book is Circling Home, What I Learned by Living Elsewhere. And you have lived in a few fascinating places. Tell us about that.
Well, I lived in Ivory Coast in West Africa for 6 years, and then Tanzania in East Africa for 3 years, and then in Geneva, Switzerland. And all of those sojourns were basically to follow my husband, who was a public health doctor going to work on AIDS in these various places for the Centers for Disease Control.
And by the way, you took your kids, or were they born there?
So our children were small. My son was 4, my daughter 1, and I did take them, and I also took my work. I'm a freelance writer, so I was able to work everywhere I went and was actually working on a book when we first arrived in Ivory Coast. And so if you want to hear the past part of the biography, that book is about Central American immigrants in the U.S., and it's called Waiting on Washington.
Surprisingly, a copy of that just popped up on the screen. So I just happened to have the cover I found on Amazon.
Wonderful. Good for you.
And tell us just a real quick bit about that. I want to get to your other book, but Central American workers?
Yeah, that I interviewed hundreds of people who had emigrated from El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua during the wars there in the 1980s and 1990s, and wanted to know why they were going to Washington, D.C., of all places, what they did when they got there, and what kind of trajectory. Were they able to eventually become American citizens, buy houses, live the American dream?
Fascinating. I will read that because you know what kind of books I read already.
I do.
I will find that fascinating. So you take your kids and your husband, you move to Africa. Was it for a specific reason?
I went to direct an AIDS project there for the Centers for Disease Control. And when we went in the 1990s, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic there. And people were dying just by the thousands and the hundreds of thousands all over Africa. And the sad thing is you'll have a picture at some point of a guard standing with my 2 children.
Yes. There it
At
is.
did you get it?
Yes.
At that time, we weren't able to do anything other than to help people with medications to alleviate their opportunistic infections and side effects. But that guard, who was very close to us and to our children, died after 2 years, after we were there 2 years. And the same thing happened with a man who was a cook in our household, occasional cook. And he too, after a number of years succumbed to AIDS, and his wife died and then his infant daughter.
Oh,
so
boy.
it was just like a wildfire in the 90s.
And was it more prevalent there in Africa, that part of Africa, than other places in the world?
At that time it was, because there was a lot of education in the U.S., so it was waning a bit. The rate of infection was going down in the U.S. in the 90s, but it was really ramping up, and it was at its worst in the 90s in Africa. Yeah. And what I was going to tell you is that the bright spot in our work, in working in Africa during the 1990s and the 2000s, is that by 2000, there was good medication available to stop, AIDS from advancing. And the U.S. did a wonderful thing through the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which passed through Congress in 2003. And we sent billions of dollars overseas to pay for medications for people. And PEPFAR is now attributed with saving 25 million lives.
Wow.
So by the time we went back to Africa in 2005 and lived in Tanzania for 3 years, people weren't dying
Mm,
around us, and we didn't have to witness, the sad demise of
yeah.
people all around us. So it was a much more hopeful time.
Now, the does the book chronicle your children and what they did there and where they went to school and how they grew up?
It it does. It really does personalize what it's like to be a third culture kid.
Mm,
That's what they're called.
third culture.
And they grew up pretty much in Ivory Coast speaking French,
Mm,
so they're
nice.
now fluent in French.
Yeah,
And then they had a hard repatriation when they came back to the U.S. in
yeah.
2000.
I bet.
And
Yeah.
so it was a couple of hard years for them, but they had such good memories of growing up in West Africa that when my husband said, would you guys consider moving to Tanzania
Hmm.
in 2005? Even though they were in junior high and high school, they said, yeah, let's
Wow.
go, we'll go.
Yeah.
And the great thing is, the second time around, we all hit the ground running. We loved Tanzania. We did all kinds of family outings like climbing Mount Meru,
Yeah.
just doing safaris and all sorts of things. It
By
was
the
a
way,
great time.
Tanzania's in East Africa.
That's right,
Was
right,
there a
right
real
below Kenya.
was there real contrast between East Africa and West Africa?
Great question. Yeah, huge contrast. West Africa, when we arrived there, one of the reasons why it was so hard to adjust is it's a very tropical country,
I see.
steamy, humid, all kinds of parasites and bugs you have to get used to. And
Wow.
so in East Africa, much drier. I always say that the best features of West Africa are the culture.
Mm,
Very deep historical roots and cultures there that have masked traditions,
yeah.
dance, all of that. In East Africa, the feature I loved so much was the landscapes.
Mm,
You have the Serengeti, you have Kilimanjaro, you have the ocean.
yeah.
We had the Indian Ocean in Zanzibar.
Yeah. Well, most of us can only dream about visiting the Serengeti sometime in our life, but you lived it. You went there.
We did, and we spent a lot of time. Our house in Dar es Salaam, the capital, was only a block from the Indian Ocean, and
Mm,
so we would walk down there and swim, and
wow.
you it was a great place to have a family and to spend time with your teenagers before they
Yeah.
grow off and go in
You
their own
you
direction.
built memories. That's what I always say. Let's
Absolutely.
go build some memories. Here's some photos, by the way. Your kids. It looks like they're by some a picture of an elephant and another animal.
Right, that was in Benin. We did a lot of traveling all around Africa when we were based in both Ivory Coast and Tanzania. So that was in Benin. Um, you'll have another picture, I think, of the guard that I mentioned,
Yes. Here we have the guard.
who was close to our family and unfortunately passed away.
This next picture, I
Um,
think, is it an AIDS clinic?
that's a clinic, a CDC sponsored clinic I think that one's in Tanzania. And people are coming for free testing, free medications, all provided by this PEPFAR program.
Hmm.
So, we can pat ourselves on the back. We did something really good in the world by
Yep.
sending a lot of money overseas for public health.
This next picture, I think, is standing in front of Mount Kilimanjaro. Am I right?
Right. I had some adventures even in my middle ages. Middle as a 50-year-old, I climbed Kilimanjaro with
Oh
eight
boy!
women friends,
Wow.
and my son did it with his class, his high school class.
Hmm.
So that's another benefit of growing up overseas. The international schools provide all kinds of wonderful community service opportunities and excursions with the classes.
And this last picture is just a wide open. Maybe Mount Kilimanjaro's in the background too.
Yes, that's when we were doing a climb up Mount Meru, the second highest peak in Tanzania, with the kids, and we're looking at Kilimanjaro, and I'm dreaming of climbing it
Yeah.
someday.
I didn't see it the first time through, but the mountains up above the clouds.
Exactly. And
Amazing.
that's exactly how it looks. It's kind of this haunting specter back there.
We we're running out of time. I wanted to just see what you wanted to tell us about the book.
Well, I think besides bearing witness to AIDS and the arc of AIDS work over 30 years and how much we did to help people in other countries, it really talks about, my book talks about the inner journeys of finding home in foreign places, in other places, and the inner work you have to do to come to an appreciation rather than a fear of foreign places and people of other cultures, and to really appreciate and embrace where you are.
What's amazing is your kids had this great journey and experience. Where did they end up living?
I have a daughter in London. They're global citizens to the max. My daughter has two children with her partner, and we get to see them a couple times a year. And my son, who lived all over the US, has now gravitated to Seattle. So
Seattle.
fortunately, we have one of our kids in the area with us.
Okay. Oh, that's right. You're in Seattle. Okay.
Yep.
Amazing. Well,
Yep.
this is a intriguing book, fascinating book. I'm going to put it on my list. I have a giant list, but I want to cut to this one very soon. Thank you, Terry Repak, for. By the way, your what will people find at your website? TerryRepak.com. It's on the screen. Also, the Instagram is on the screen.
So my website has all kinds of links to articles that I've written, both as spin-offs to this book and also articles from when we lived in Tanzania.
Nice.
So I was writing a column there for a magazine.
Nice.
And it also has links to podcasts, and it'll have your link too.
Nice. Very good. Well, thank you, Terry. We're going to have you on again. We didn't get enough time. I could talk to you for hours. Unfortunately, people stopped listening after about 5 minutes, so that's why we try to keep them short. But we'll have you back, and thank you so much. And please check out the book. I want to say this last thing is Christmas time is here, holiday time, I should say. I go to so many parties, and I always take a host gift. A book is a great host gift. So if you guys go to Amazon, order Terry's book. Don't order one, order 5 of them. Give them out throughout the season. That's a good idea. Thank you, Terry. We'll be back with more Briggs on Books right after this. More authors coming up.